Hello, and welcome to Echoes of the Forgotten Earth, a place where curiosity curls up beside you and science wanders the long, scenic road towards sleep. Tonight's gentle exploration may pull a little more strongly at the edges of your imagination than usual. We're following a question that sounds like something from science fiction, yet it carries the fingerprints of myth, history, and geology all at once. What if our planet has already been rebooted? What if everything we think of as solid, everything we build our days and dreams upon isn't the first draft of this story? Maybe we're not standing at the opening chapter of progress at all, but living inside a sequel with entire volumes torn out and lost. Before we walk too far into that idea, let me start with something simple. Where are you listening from right now? Maybe you're curled up under a blanket, letting the day soften around the edges. Maybe you've slipped in your earbuds and you're just staring at the ceiling in the dark. Maybe you're sitting quietly in a still room, a warm mug of tea cooling slowly at your side. Wherever you happen to be, and whatever time glows on your clock, you've arrived here in this moment with me. If these slow, quiet explorations help you unwind, ease you towards sleep, or give you a gentle space for late-night thoughts, I'd be thankful if you tapped the like button and maybe subscribed. That tiny action helps this quiet corner drift toward others who might also need a pause in their day. Now, let's settle in. The notion that the world can be reset is not new. You can find its traces in stories from virtually every culture, in ruins half hidden by centuries of dirt and roots, and even in the patterns etched into the rocks beneath our shoes. Most of the time, we think of Earth's story as a straight line. One event leads to the next, and eventually to us standing here in the modern age, holding the accumulated weight of countless years before us. But imagine, just for a moment, that history is not a tidy chain, but a loop. Picture a time long before the pyramids, long before written words, long before anything we can comfortably track. Imagine rises and collapses that came and went before our first recorded myth. Peoples who may have walked the same valleys we hike through now, left their handprints on the same cliffs, breathed the same sky. Perhaps they weren't erased by wars alone, but by disasters so overwhelming that even memory disintegrated. It can sound odd, maybe even unreasonable. Yet when you look closely at the world, there are places where the evidence almost seems to murmur. Stories of waters that swallow the earth, of fires that consume entire ages, of tempests that flip the balance. Nearly every tradition carries some echo of a great calamity that wipes the world clean. Scholars often interpret these tales as symbolic ways ancient people made sense of earthquakes, floods, or volcanic eruptions. But what if they're also slivers of remembrance? Memories stretched thin across centuries until they frayed into stories, then legends, then myths. Think, too, about how fragile our own age would be if it were suddenly reset. Imagine that, overnight, the power grid collapsed. Every light goes dark. Satellites wink out in orbit. The entire digital web that crisscrosses the world falls silent. Within a few weeks, much of what we think of as normal life would be gone. Give it a few decades, and our skyscrapers would weaken and fall. Highways would crack, buckle, and disappear beneath shrubs, grass, and trees. The steady hum of traffic in cities would fade, replaced once more by wind in the trees and the sound of running water. Forests and rivers would seep back into spaces we once claimed. Thousands of years later, what would truly be left? Maybe a scattering of broken foundations, weird corroded bits of metal and concrete no longer attached to anything obvious, and perhaps stories held by the descendants of survivors. To some distant future people, how advanced would we seem? Would they realize we had orbiting stations, giant particle accelerators, and a globe-spanning internet? Or would we exist only as a vague rumor, a half-remembered civilization swallowed by time? This is where the thought grows heavier, because Earth has shown us, again and again, that it is capable of wiping the slate shockingly clean. Entire groups of creatures that once dominated the planet are no longer here. Dinosaurs, for instance, flourished for over 150 million years, far longer than our own species has walked the Earth. They were diverse, successful, and present on every continent. Then a single object from space, a chunk of rock, slammed into the planet. One impact, and the game board flipped. Food chains collapsed, skies darkened, habitats burned or froze. What survived had to evolve into forms barely recognizable compared to what existed before. If nature can erase such a powerful, long-lasting lineage, is it really impossible that it could have erased one of our own kind long before recorded history began? There are places that make us wonder, pyramids older than we once believed possible, stone arrangements that are difficult to explain at a glance, artifacts that seem out of step with the ages they're found in. Most of these mysteries soften when patient archaeology and careful study catch up with them, but a few questions always seem to hang in the air, like loose threads that haven't quite been pulled. If humanity disappeared tomorrow, how much of the world we've made would survive 50,000 years of storms, earthquakes, shifting crust, and ice? And if only a tiny fraction endured, what kind of puzzle would that leave behind for whoever might come after us? This is where the idea of a reset drifts out of pure fantasy and becomes something closer to pattern. Our planet is constantly resetting itself. Great sheets of ice sweep across continents, scraping away entire ecosystems. Supervolcanoes spew ash into the sky, dimming the sun, chilling the air, and toppling food webs. Ocean currents shift their routes, tilting weather systems for centuries at a time. Asteroids strike with more energy than millions of nuclear weapons. To live on Earth is to stand on a stage that sometimes sweeps away its scenery and ushers in a new cast. A reset doesn't have to be total. It doesn't need to scrub away every trace. It can be partial enough to scatter what was once centralized, enough to send survivors scrambling, enough to push memories into the haze until stories become the only inheritance left. Then, over time, the rebuilding begins. Small settlements appear, tools sharpen, farming slowly spreads, and what we call history seems to start anew, as if from nothing at all. We usually assume this is the first time the story has played out this way, but perhaps it's just the most recent draft. Even in science, versions of this thought take shape, phrased in different language. We talk about Earth's cyclical systems, ice ages and warm periods repeating in long rhythms, the big five mass extinctions that each rearranged life, the periodic reshaping of climates and continents. Across deep time, the rocks show at least 5 global die-offs, each one erasing the majority of living species, each one followed by an explosion of new forms, as though the planet had cleared the pieces and started a new round. Those are resets for biology. But could similar resets have nudged culture, societies, and technology, maybe more than once? If that seems like too big a leap, pause and picture a flood. Not a simple river bursting its banks, but a vast event driven by melting ice sheets or shifting seas. Look at where our cities are. Almost all of humanity's major population centers sit near coastlines. Now imagine a rapid jump in sea level, or a colossal tsunami, or a chain reaction of earthquakes that sends walls of water sweeping over them. The people who fled inland would tell their children that there was once a time when towers touched the clouds and lights burned in the night. A few generations later, those stories would sound impossible to young ears, more fairy tale than memory. 1,000 years on, they might harden into legends of a lost golden age, or be dismissed as nonsense. And quietly, the cycle would start over. So when very old stories describe a flood that drowned the entire world, or fire raining from the sky, or an age of darkness before a new dawn, it may be that they are carrying echoes, stretched and embellished, blurred around the edges, but not purely invented. Human memory is long when it comes to storytelling, but short when it comes to exact details. We hold on to impressions, not full archives. The idea that Earth may already have been reset doesn't have to be terrifying. Strangely, it can also be grounding. It reminds us how temporary each particular version of the world is, how delicate the mark of our moment might be, and at the same time, how stubbornly life itself persists. Dinosaurs vanished, mammals took their place, ice advanced, forests came back, civilizations collapsed, others grew in the ruins. Reset or no reset, the narrative keeps going. And here we are, inside this particular chapter, wondering whether we're the first authors or just one in a longer series. When you close your eyes and imagine the earth beneath you, not just the thin skin of soil and pavement, but the deep, layered rock and compressed time. You're lying on billions of years of resets, continents crashing and splitting, mountain ranges building and wearing away, seas flooding in and pulling back, whole branches of life arriving and disappearing. Our moment is just a thin coat of paint on that ancient surface, delicate and fleeting. Yet from where we stand, it feels like the whole story. But what if it isn't? What if other chapters lie buried deeper than we've ever dug? If that's the case, maybe Earth's greatest secret is not hidden in what's coming next, but in what has already played out and slipped beyond our memory. And that thought carries us softly into the next stretch of this journey, where we'll look at how the idea of a reset has lived inside the human imagination. In myths carried across centuries, whispering of ages before our own that ended not in a slow, gentle fade, but in a sudden break. When we hear the word reset, it usually sounds simple, almost mechanical. A button on a console, a tiny hole on the back of a modem, a switch you flip when something stops working the way it should. In the digital world we live in, that idea is familiar and oddly reassuring. If your phone freezes, you restart it. If your laptop locks up, you reboot. If a game goes badly, you load from an earlier save. But when we take that same word and apply it to an entire planet, the meaning changes completely. A reset here isn't a quiet click in a gentle restart tone. It's upheaval, transformation, erasure, and rebirth tangled together. It isn't tidy and controlled. It's messy, wild, and often violent. And yet, in a strange way, it can also be necessary, like a forest fire that clears away dead undergrowth so new life can rise. To really think about Earth resetting, it helps to let go of the image of a button entirely. This world is not a machine waiting for a reboot command. It's a vast, layered system made of overlapping cycles. Water cycles, climate cycles, extinction cycles, geological cycles. A reset here doesn't look like everything shutting down and then blinking back to its original settings. It looks like one long-running pattern splitting apart so that another pattern can take its place. Sometimes that shift is slow, stretching over millions of years. Other times it's sudden and brutal, leaving no space for adjustment at all. In both cases, though, the outcome is the same. What felt normal disappears. What grows in afterward hardly resembles what came before. You can see this clearly in the history of life. Roughly 250 million years ago, Earth went through what scientists call the Great Dying, the most devastating extinction event we know of. More than 90% of all species vanished. It wasn't just one cause. It wasn't a single asteroid or a single volcano. It was a stack of catastrophes. Massive volcanic eruptions pouring lava and gas into the air, wild climate swings, oceans turning poisonous and low in oxygen. It was as though the planet itself flipped the table. What emerged after that wasn't a repaired version of the old world. It was a nearly empty one. But slowly, life returned. And the new life that took hold was drastically different from what had been there before. Out of that stark, scraped clean planet rose the early ancestors of the dinosaurs. They stepped into ecological roles that had once belonged to completely different creatures, animals no one alive today has seen except as ghostly impressions in rock. That event wasn't just a mass extinction, it was a full reset. You can see the same rhythm in the record of climate. Ice ages arrive and retreat. Each wave of ice remakes the shape of continents. Glaciers grind down mountains, carve deep valleys, and bury vast stretches of land under silent, slow-moving ice. When the ice pulls back, it leaves behind new lakes, new river paths, and fresh plains of exposed soil. Every one of those cycles wipes away part of what came before, scrubbing landscapes clean and making room for something different. To the living things caught in the middle of it, each shift must have felt like the end. An age of endless cold, or an age of overwhelming melt and flood. From a longer vantage point, though, each one is just another swing of Earth's internal pendulum, another version of the reset mechanism that keeps the system from staying frozen in one state forever. But resets aren't always purely natural. Sometimes they're human. Think about a once great city, humming with life, trade, and noise. Then picture it centuries later. Roads broken and swallowed by roots, walls collapsed, plazas filled with trees instead of people. What once felt indestructible becomes scattered stones and faint outlines under the soil. Civilizations rise believing they've carved out something lasting. They write laws, raise monuments, and tell themselves their order will continue indefinitely. Yet over and over, those societies fracture, shrink, or disappear, leaving behind fragments for archaeologists to puzzle over. The fall of the Western Roman Empire was a kind of regional reset for large parts of Europe. Complex administrative and trade systems collapsed. Cities lost population. Knowledge that had been stored in a relatively centralized way scattered or went dark. It took centuries before new polities and structures emerged to replace what was lost. The great Maya cities, with their towering pyramids and intricate calendars, were gradually abandoned. Jungle crept over them, covering stone with vines and soil, while the descendants of their builders adapted and carried on in new forms and new places. The civilization changed shape, but the world of monument-filled urban centers reset. These collapses weren't the end of humanity, but they were the end of particular world's local resets that altered the course of millions of lives. The idea of a reset can feel unnerving precisely because it undercuts the belief that what we've built is permanent. It suggests that nothing, no empire, no technology, no comfort, is completely safe from being swept away. But maybe that's a deeper truth of our situation. Nothing is truly permanent. Earth has been telling us this in slow language for as long as it's existed. You can see it in mountains ground down grain by grain, in shorelines pulled back or pushed forward by rising and falling seas, in forests that regrow from the ashes of old ones. Reset isn't an exception. It's part of the operating system. It's also worth remembering that resets rarely mean absolute annihilation. They don't usually erase every trace of what came before. A reset might shatter structures, dissolve cultures, or extinguish species, but it always leaves behind seeds of what comes next. Survivors adapt, and those survivors' plants, animals, ideas become the platform for the world that follows. Think of the tiny mammals that darted between the feet of dinosaurs. In their own time, they were nothing special. Small, mostly nocturnal, easy to overlook. But when the asteroid struck and the age of dinosaurs ended in fire and shadow, those small, unnoticed survivors stepped into the open. From them, countless new forms emerged. In a way, they weren't just passengers on the reset, they were the raw material for the reset's aftermath. Not the cause, but the continuation. This lens helps us look at human history from another angle. If Earth has already cycled through enormous biological resets, and if civilizations have already risen and fallen many times, then maybe those odd fragments we find, enigmatic ruins, persistent flood myths, inexplicable gaps, aren't just curiosities. Maybe they're the faint outlines of a longer cycle. The crumbling stonework we study might be the leftover pages of earlier chapters. The legends of burning skies or submerged cities might be cultural memories of resets endured. Our own achievements, skylines, data centers, satellites, may, one day, be reduced to the same status. Half-buried relics and haunting stories. Someone far in the future might stand over a rusted beam or a strange concentration of plastic in the rocks and wonder what kind of people we were. Even the word reset nudges us into the wrong mental picture. It makes us imagine a single instant, a hard line in time separating a before from an after. But more often, resets come in waves. They arrive as layers of disruption. A drought here, a plague there, a war, a series of storms, an economic collapse, a series of migrations. Only when you step back far enough, when centuries or millennia have passed, do you realize those layers, taken together, added up to a world-transforming change. Imagine a forest after a massive wildfire. At first, the damage is all you can see. Blackened trunks, scattered ash, empty sky where there used to be a canopy of leaves. It looks as if everything is gone. But hidden just below the surface, seeds wait. Some species actually depend on fire. Their cones only open when exposed to intense heat. Within months, green shoots push up through the charred soil. Within years, young trees stretch higher. Within centuries, the forest is thick again but altered. The species mix is different. The age structure is new. The layout of clearings and groves has changed. The old forest is not coming back. A new one has taken its place, built on the remains of the old. That's what a true reset looks like. Not a clean erasure and restart, but a transformation. Which raises a harder question. Where do humans fit inside this system? Are we a one-off event, an unrepeatable experiment in consciousness that will exist only once in the lifetime of this planet? Or are we just the current version of something Earth has seen before and might see again? If our species vanished tomorrow, would something similar to us eventually appear? Given enough time, would evolution stumble again toward large brains, complex language, tools, and cities? Or are we the extremely unlikely outcome of a very particular combination of events, so delicate that if we disappear, nothing quite like us will ever return? We may never have a completely satisfying answer, but even asking the question shows how deeply resets press us to reconsider our place. There's another layer to this too. Resets don't always look like resets from the inside. Imagine living through a slow-motion collapse. Infrastructure crumbles a bit more each year, storms grow more extreme, crops fail in some regions, conflicts flare up over scarce resources. To the people inside that era, life might feel like an endless stream of crises, but not necessarily like the end of a civilization. Not at first. Only far later, when the pattern is visible in hindsight, do we look back and say, that was the moment everything shifted. That was the reset. Right now, with rising temperatures, shifting wildlife ranges, melting glaciers, and dizzyingly fast technological change, some people wonder whether we're living through such a period. To us, it's daily news headlines, weather forecasts, market swings. But to a distant future observer, this era might stand out as a hinge point. They might give it a name: the reset of the early 21st century. Even our everyday language betrays how familiar we are with the idea of resets. We talk about starting over, rebuilding, bouncing back. These are all reset words. They carry the assumption that collapse is not always final, that from ruin something new can be assembled. A city leveled by fire is reconstructed. A society fractured by internal conflict eventually reorganizes inside new borders or under new systems. A species squeezed to the brink sometimes adapts into a new niche and survives in a different form. In this sense, reset is not synonymous with obliteration. It's transformation through loss. So the image of a tidy button on a smooth control panel is far too small for what we're talking about. Earth does not behave like a device on a desk. Its resets are sprawling, jagged, unpredictable, and sometimes catastrophic. But embedded in them are always the seeds of renewal. To think about Earth as a place that resets over and over is to zoom out beyond a single lifetime, or even a single civilization. It's to see a pattern of clearing and reshaping that stretches across ages. It's not about a pristine restart. It's about an ongoing story in which endings and beginnings are constantly overlapping, tangled together like roots beneath a forest. And that brings us to where imagination and story step in. If resets are part of the pattern, it makes sense that human beings have tried to understand them the way we understand so many big, frightening, beautiful things, through stories. Flood myths, fire myths, tales of darkness and rebirth. These aren't random fantasies. They may be echoes distorted, stylized echoes of real upheavals, experiences so overwhelming that they could only be carried forward in the safest container humans have ever known: the story. And if almost every culture on Earth keeps some version of a time when the world was wiped clean and begun again, maybe that's because, in one way or another, it really was. When people try to make sense of resets, they don't usually have geology textbooks, satellite data, or climate models in front of them. For most of human history, they had only two tools: experience and story. Stories became the way to explain why the world looked the way it did, why rivers suddenly swelled and swallowed fields, why the ground shook, why mountains smoked, why the sky went dark. Stories were also how communities carried knowledge forward when nothing was written down, and when something happened that was too big, too terrifying, or too strange to fully understand, story was the only way to hold it. Inside those stories, you can often hear faint echoes, whispers that sound suspiciously like memories of resets, filtered through belief, culture, and imagination. One of the clearest and most widespread of these echoes is the flood. Across continents and centuries, in cultures with no direct contact, stories of world-ending floods keep resurfacing. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a deluge so immense it nearly wiped out humanity. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah builds an ark to survive waters that rise above the mountains. Hindu tradition tells of Manu, warned of a coming flood and preserved to repopulate the world. Greek myths speak of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who survive when Zeus sends torrents to erase a corrupted humanity. Cross the oceans and you find similar tales. The Hopi, the Inca, and many other indigenous peoples of the Americas preserve memories of waters rising high enough to drown the world they knew. How is it that so many isolated cultures tell such similar stories? One answer is simple. Floods happen everywhere. Rivers overflow, monsoons rage, coastlines are smashed by storms. It makes perfect sense that early communities would tell stories about water as both giver and taker of life. But the scale described in these myths often goes far beyond what a single valley flood or seasonal storm can explain. They don't just talk about villages washed away. They talk about the entire world transformed, civilizations wiped out, humanity reduced to a handful of survivors. That feels like more than a bad rainy season. It sounds like the stretched, stylized memory of something vast, maybe not always literal oceans covering every last hilltop, but something large enough that, in memory, it might as well have. Then there are the myths of fire. In Norse stories, the end of the world is Ragnarok gods falling, flames swallowing the earth, everything burning before a new world emerges from the ashes. In Hindu cosmology, Shiva's dance of destruction brings fire that clears creation before it begins again. Several indigenous traditions in North America tell of earlier worlds ending in fire and being replaced by new ones. Even Christian apocalyptic visions speak of the earth being cleansed by flames at the end of days. Fire in these tales is not just a destroyer, it's a purifier, a reset force. It burns away the old, making room for the new. If flood myths show the power of water to reset the world, fire myths show the matching power of heat and flame. Both can erase, both can renew. There are also stories of long darkness. In some traditions, monstrous creatures swallow the sun and moon, leaving the world in shadow. In others, gods hide the light as punishment. In some, day after day passes under a dim, eerie sky. Events in the natural world can inspire such stories. Massive volcanic eruptions can throw ash into the atmosphere, turning blue skies gray and cooling the planet for months or years. Large meteor impacts can do the same. Even a long or unexpected eclipse, if not understood, might feel like a cosmic theft of light. For people living through such times, the experience would be terrifying. Crops could fail, animals might die, temperatures could drop. It could feel like the end of all things. For their descendants, told about such times in stories, it might sound like the world had literally ended and begun again. What these myths share is an underlying idea. Cycles. The world doesn't just begin and go on forever. It ends and begins again. Not once, but many times. The Aztecs believed the universe had already gone through several ages, each destroyed in a different way. By jaguars, by wind, by fire, by flood. They saw themselves as living under the fifth sun, fully aware that 4 previous worlds had already collapsed. Across Polynesia, stories speak of lands that sank beneath the waves, only for new islands to rise. In Mesoamerica, the Maya built calendars spanning immense stretches of time, marking ages that rolled over like cosmic odometers. These weren't just survival tales, they were frameworks for reality, ways of saying, everything you see is temporary, worlds come and go. If you listen closely, these myths start to sound less like pure fantasy and more like distilled memory turned into metaphor, warning, and worldview. They remind people that rivers can grow dangerous, that fire demands respect, that the balance holding everything together can shift. For ancient communities, myth was instruction. Respect the river. Respect the volcano. Respect the seasons and the limits. Forget, and the reset returns. What makes these echoes even more striking is how widely they appear. Civilizations separated by oceans and mountains still hold myths about floods, fires, and long darkness. You can say that human beings naturally invent similar stories because we share similar fears. But you can also wonder if those shared fears come from shared experiences, large-scale events that affected many different groups, remembered in different languages and symbols. If Earth did undergo partial resets, regional or global catastrophes survivors would have told stories. Those stories would turn into myths. Centuries later, the myths would long outlast the exact events that gave birth to them. Think about our current world. Imagine trying to explain something like climate change or nuclear weapons to people living 3,000 years in the future after a collapse, with no digital records preserved. Would the science survive? Or would people remember it as tales of skies turn strange, oceans rising to swallow coasts, or man-made suns falling from the sky? With time, graphs and equations would fade. What would remain is story. Some myths even speak straight out about worlds before ours. The Hopi tell of previous worlds destroyed by fire, then by ice, then by flood. Each reset followed by a new beginning. The ancient Greeks told of different ages of humanity: golden, silver, bronze, and finally iron, each one more troubled than the last, each one ending with divine judgment and change. In Hindu cosmology, vast cycles called yugas describe humanity rising, flourishing, and decaying before the age resets and the pattern begins again. These aren't isolated ideas. They're part of a broader human habit, sensing that we might not be the first people to stand on this stage. Many archaeologists and historians interpret such tales primarily as metaphor moral teaching for communities, symbolic explanations of seasonal cycles or local disasters. And often, that's exactly what they are. But metaphor and memory can overlap. A flood myth can simultaneously teach respect for a river and echo a dim recollection of a time when coasts truly did disappear. A story of fire from the sky can be both a warning against arrogance and a shadow of some ancient eruption or impact. The line between story and record is thin and blurred. When you hear these myths stacked side by side from Mesopotamia to the Andes, from the Arctic to the Pacific, they stop feeling like isolated inventions and start sounding like a choir singing variations on the same theme. Earth has ended before. It will end again. Not absolutely, not forever, but enough that the world people know becomes unrecognizable. Destruction, renewal, collapse, regrowth, memory, myth. You don't have to see any of this as supernatural to take it seriously. If myths really do preserve faint memories of resets, then listening to them becomes another way of hearing the planet's history, filtered through human hearts instead of instruments. They remind us that survival depends on adaptation, on noticing warning signs, on respecting forces greater than our own planning. They also offer comfort. If the world has ended before and then been renewed, then maybe endings are never as final as they seem from inside them. Like winter, they're part of a larger cycle. For people long ago, this might have been the most important lesson of all. So when we think of Earth being reset, we don't have to picture it only as a distant, abstract scenario. We can see it in the old stories that somehow managed to travel across rivers, deserts, and mountain ranges, tales that kept resurfacing in places that never met, as though the planet itself had left fingerprints on our collective imagination. Maybe those stories are warnings, maybe they're memories, maybe they're both. Either way, they whisper the same thing. What we call permanent is never truly so. The concept of reset is not modern. It has been with us since our oldest tales were first spoken around fires in the dark. And as those stories linger, they point us toward a louder, more literal record of resets, not told in words, but etched into layers of stone and fossil. The Earth itself has kept a kind of diary, not in ink, but in rock. To read that diary, we have to look at the scars, the bands of ash, the sudden gaps in fossil layers, the chemical signatures frozen in ancient sediments. In those layers, we find moments when the planet really did clear much of its slate and start again. When you look across the long history of Earth, you begin to notice a rhythm. Not a soft, gentle rhythm of slow change, but one punctuated by jarring interruptions. Floods that engulf whole regions, fires that rage until entire ecosystems disappear. Ages that vanish so completely that if we didn't dig for them, we'd never know they happened. We give these events names: extinctions, collapses, disasters. But you could also call them what they are, at a deeper level: resets. They are the moments when the board is wiped cleaner than we like to imagine, and a new game begins. Start with water. You don't have to stretch your imagination far to understand why ancient people feared it. Water gives life. It irrigates fields, fills wells, carries fish, but it can also rise faster than anyone can run. The same rivers that nurtured the earliest cities, the Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Indus, could also break their banks and surge across everything people had carefully built. One season's blessing could become the next season's devastation, but the floods remembered by myth and recorded in geology go far beyond yearly overflow. Around 12,000 years ago, as the most recent ice age drew to a close, enormous glaciers began to melt. Seas rose hundreds of feet. Coastlines moved inland, swallowing land that people may have called home for generations. Whole regions now underwater were once dry ground plains, forests and shorelines where humans and animals walked. Doggerland, which once connected what is now Britain to mainland Europe, is gone beneath the North Sea. Sunderland, a vast tropical land that once stretched across what is now island Southeast Asia, lies beneath today's ocean. If people lived there, and evidence suggests many did, everything they built and knew was drowned or washed away. To those communities, it wouldn't have felt like the gentle reshaping of maps. It would have felt like the world itself was disappearing. Now move from water to fire. At first glance, it might seem odd to talk about fire as a planetary scale reset. Most of us think of wildfires or volcanoes as local events. But sometimes, fire's reach spreads far wider. Forests naturally burn. Lightning strikes and dry wood catches. Some ecosystems even depend on this. But there are times when fire comes from deeper and wider forces. Huge volcanic eruptions can blow ash high into the atmosphere, darkening skies across entire hemispheres. They can send rivers of lava racing across landscapes, burying everything in their path. They can pour gases into the air that slowly, then rapidly, reshape climate. About 75,000 years ago, the eruption of Mount Toba in Indonesia may have plunged the planet into a kind of volcanic winter. Some researchers think it caused a sharp drop in global temperatures and may have drastically reduced human populations. Whether or not it brought us to the edge of extinction, it was the kind of event that could leave scars in both land and memory. Imagine years of dim sunlight, crop failures, and strange weather. For those who survived, it would have felt like the sky itself had turned against them. Then there are fires from the sky. When a large asteroid or comet hits Earth, the energy released is staggering. Not just at the impact site, but worldwide. Shockwaves circle the planet. Forests thousands of miles away ignite in intense heat. Dust, soot, and vaporized rock billow into the upper atmosphere, blocking sunlight. 66 million years ago, a roughly 10-kilometer-wide asteroid hit near what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. That event ended the age of non-bird dinosaurs. But the impact itself was only the opening strike. Many animals likely died in the fires that swept across continents. Others starved as sunlight dimmed and plants failed. For anything alive at that time, it must have been an apocalypse beyond imagination. Fire, then cold, then a long, dark uncertainty. And still, between the floods and the fires, life eventually stitched itself back together. Roughly 450 million years ago, the Ordovician-Silurian extinction wiped out most marine life. Later, the Devonian extinctions cleared away much of the rich reef-building life that had dominated the oceans. The Permian extinction, the Great Dying we spoke of earlier, eliminated nearly everything. Then the Cretaceous event ended the dinosaurs' long rule. Each time, the world before and the world after would have looked like two different planets to an eyewitness if such an observer could have stood through it. And yet, those forgotten ages are underneath our feet right now, layered in stone. What stands out about these resets is how thorough they can be. When 9 out of 10 species vanish, entire ways of life vanish with them. Think of a forest with nearly every tree, insect, bird, and mammal gone. Think of an ocean with no fish, no reefs, just a handful of tough survivors. Earth has gone through that. Not once, but several times. Each time, life has inched back from the brink, experimented with new forms, and filled the empty spaces with surprising solutions. In that sense, we live in the aftermath of many forgotten worlds. We walk on the far side of disasters we never knew, benefiting from the openings they created. This doesn't just happen on the scale of tens of millions of years. Even in the narrower corridor of human history, there are ages we only dimly remember. Around 1200 BCE, a complex web of Bronze Age civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean unraveled. Palace centers burned, trade routes collapsed, writing systems disappeared or shrank to limited use. For people in that era, it must have been bewildering, a sharp step down in stability and complexity. To us, with our limited records, it's still mysterious. Was it drought, invaders, earthquakes, all of them together? What we see in the rubble is the outline of a forgotten age and a local reset that changed the direction of entire cultures. Multiply that by the immense spans of time before humans ever wrote anything down, and you begin to grasp just how many chapters may have been erased. When we speak about Earth resetting, it's easy to imagine only the violence, the floods roaring through valleys, the flames roaring through forests, the impacts cracking the sky. But there's always another side. After each reset, something new begins. Without the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs, mammals might never have stepped into the open in quite the same way. Without volcanic winters and ancient climate swings, ecosystems might never have shifted in ways that allowed new innovations of life. Without the end of those long-forgotten ages, we would not be here at all. That doesn't soften the grief of what was lost, but it shows the pattern. Reset, regrowth, renewal. For us, watching from this brief, bright moment in Earth's long night sky, these stories are not just curiosities, they're reminders. Seas can rise again, volcanoes can erupt again, asteroids are still out there, circling the sun. Ages can still end. We are inclined to believe in the permanence of our current arrangement, our borders, our technologies, our climate, our familiar coastlines. But the rock record whispers otherwise. The question is not whether the planet can reset. The question is when. When you see cliffs that reveal stacked stripes of stone, or when scientists pull up long cylinders of rock and ice from deep underground, you're looking at the pages of a book the Earth has been writing for billions of years. Here and there in those pages, something breaks the pattern. Thin seams of ash, sudden disappearances of certain fossils, gaps where whole ecosystems are present in one layer and gone in the next. It's as if the clock doesn't just mark the passing of time, it marks the moments of reset. One of the cleanest examples is the narrow band of clay that marks the boundary between the Cretaceous period and the Paleogene that followed. In rock layers of that age around the world, you can find a thin, dark line rich in iridium, a metal that's rare in Earth's crust, but common in asteroids. Below that line, you find dinosaur fossils, flourishing in many forms. Above it, they're gone. That razor-thin layer is the planetary scar left by the asteroid that ended their age. A single, quiet tick in the geological clock that took millions of years to recover from. Deeper down, another great boundary marks the end of the Permian period. Here, the record is even starker. Vast volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia poured lava over huge areas for hundreds of thousands of years. Those eruptions bled gases into the air, warming the climate, acidifying and deoxygenating the oceans, poisoning entire food webs. In the rocks, you can see coal beds that caught fire, signs of oceans suffocating, and a sudden thinning of fossil diversity. It's as if the planet's systems themselves began to fail. That tick on the clock killed 9 out of every 10 species. The planet almost, in a sense, stopped breathing. Still, after a long, thin stretch of simpler, sparse life, the diversity of species began to build again. What's fascinating about this geological clock is that it doesn't tick at perfectly regular intervals, like a wristwatch, but there is a kind of rhythm. Some researchers have noticed that large extinction events and major environmental upheavals tend to cluster at intervals on the order of tens of millions of years. The causes differ: impacts, eruptions, long-term climate shifts, but the effect is the same. The clock hand jumps forward and the board resets. It's as though Earth carries an internal beat of destruction and renewal that plays out far beyond any human scale. We measure lives in decades. We measure civilizations in centuries, or, at most, a few thousand years. Earth measures in epochs, slices of time that can last millions or tens of millions of years, each with its own stable climate, geography, and forms of life. When that balance is pushed too far, the epoch ends and the clock clicks over. From inside one of those slices, it feels like reality. From outside it, it's just one arrangement among many. Think of the ice ages again. Over the past 2.5 million years, the planet has cycled through at least 20 major glaciations. Huge ice sheets spread, retreated, then spread again. Each time, habitats shifted, species moved or died, and new ecosystems appeared. For early humans, these changes weren't abstract. They were lived. Expanding ice forced people to migrate. Changing vegetation changed the animals they could hunt. What looked, from afar, like a slow pendulum swing in climate felt, up close, like life or death. And yet, even those dramatic swings are just the most recent tiny motions of the clock. If you go back further, the changes grow even larger. Continents themselves drift, collide, and break apart. Entire ocean basins open and close. Mountain ranges rise and then crumble away. Every tectonic jolt, every glacial cycle, every extinction is another movement of the hand. The phrase, geological catastrophe, can make it sound like everything happens at a crawl. But not all of these clock ticks are slow. Some, like asteroid impacts, are instantaneous on human timescales. Others, like rapid climate shifts or regional collapses, may play out over centuries, slow enough that people can adapt year by year, fast enough that history looks very different on either side. When the Sahara shifted from a green, lake-dotted landscape into the desert we know today, around 5,000 years ago, it changed where people could live and how they survived. Rock art in those regions shows animals that no longer roam there. Hippos, giraffes, cattle by lakes. Cultures moved, reinvented themselves, or disappeared. For those living through that change, it wasn't just a new weather pattern. It was the end of the world they understood. Across the geological record, another thing stands out: silence. After a big extinction, fossil diversity shrinks. For long stretches, you might see far fewer species recorded in stone. Then gradually, variety returns. It's like a heartbeat traced on paper. Sharp spikes of abundance, sudden crashes, long low lines, then a new rise. The Earth's clock doesn't simply record steady progress. It records pulses. For us, this isn't just academic. We're living on this clock. The same mechanisms that wiped out trilobites and dinosaurs and ancient reefs still operate. The same forces that carved the Grand Canyon and raised the Himalayas are still at work. We may not sense the ticking in our daily routines, but geologists see it clearly every time they read a cliff face or an ice core. Some scientists now argue that we may be approaching, or already inside, another one of those ticks. The current rate at which species are disappearing is many times higher than the estimated background rate. Climate is shifting more rapidly than in many past natural cycles. Oceans are warming and becoming more acidic. Glaciers are retreating. Coral reefs are bleaching. Looked at from the perspective of deep time, these changes have the shape of a new reset beginning, one unfolding not in a day, like an asteroid strike, but over a few centuries, still nearly instantaneous compared to the slow turning of the Earth's inner clock. What makes this potential reset different is that this time, we are not just passive passengers. We're actively turning the gears. Whether triggered by our actions or by forces far beyond our control, the planet's clock does not stop. It has struck catastrophe before, it will strike again, and those strikes are woven into Earth's story. For us, the point is not to dream about stopping the clock. That's impossible. It's to recognize its rhythm, to see the patterns, to soften the blow where and how we can when the next tick comes. When you hold this view in your mind, your perspective shifts. You're no longer just someone living in a random era. You're a tiny presence on the thin surface of a planet that has been keeping time for billions of years. Under your feet is a record of floods and fires, of times when life nearly ended and times when it exploded with new creativity. Every rocky outcrop, every canyon wall, every band of ancient ice in a polar core is a record of a tick the planet has already lived through. At some point, the clock will strike again, and the world we know will change. And that leads us to another dimension of this story. If the geological clock shows us that resets are inevitable, then the history of life is also the history of what comes afterward. Extinction is never just an ending. It's also a clearing, a harsh but effective way of resetting the stage, so evolution can write a new act. The clock records not only destruction, but the bursts of beginning that follow it. When most people hear the word extinction, their minds jump directly to loss, a creature gone forever, a branch of life snapped off the tree. That feeling is natural, and it's not wrong. Extinction is an ending, and endings have weight. But across the full sweep of Earth's story, extinction is also about change. Every time a species disappears, it frees up space resources, habitats, roles for something else. In a strange, often brutal way, extinction acts like one of the planet's reset keys. It clears enough of the board that evolution can take a new direction. Without extinction, the biosphere might settle into relatively stable patterns that are hard to shift. With it, life is repeatedly shaken and challenged. Take the dinosaurs again. They weren't one creature, but an entire world of animals. A huge variety of shapes and sizes, dominating almost every environment for 150 million years. If you had walked among them, you would have had no reason to think they'd ever disappear. Then the asteroid struck. Forest burned. Dust filled the sky. Food chains collapsed. In a geologic blink, nearly all non-bird dinosaurs were gone. And in that cleared world, the small, adaptable mammals that had survived hidden in burrows, living on scraps, able to eat a wide range of foods, found themselves in a landscape full of vacant niches. Over millions of years, they expanded, diversified, and experimented. Out of that quiet, post-catastrophe world came primates. Out of primates, eventually, came us. Without that extinction, there would be no humans to ponder it. You can see this pattern repeating over and over in deep time. The great dying at the end of the Permian was a nearly fatal blow to life. But the handful of lineages that survived went on to radiate into new forms that filled the Triassic and beyond. When ancient reef systems died off in the Devonian, other forms of marine life took over and reshaped undersea ecosystems. Each great extinction was a tragedy for what disappeared and an opportunity for whatever held on. That's what it means to call extinction a reset key. Not that it's gentle or desirable, but that it changes the rules so completely that life has to start over in many ways. Even on smaller scales, you can see this in action. Islands make this very clear. A fresh volcanic island rises from the sea as bare rock. Over time, seeds blow in, birds arrive, insects drift or fly over. A small, isolated ecosystem takes shape. Then a powerful storm or a human introduction of a new predator or disease can wipe out many of those fragile species. What follows is another small reset. Some life remains, more arrives. The community reshapes. Given enough time, this can happen over and over, with each cycle leaving a slightly different ecosystem behind. For humans, extinction now carries an extra layer of meaning, because we're directly witnessing it and often causing it. When we read about the dodo or the passenger pigeon, we're not thinking about creatures lost in some dim, prehistoric age. We're thinking about beings that vanished within the last few centuries because of us. We see forests cut, oceans overfished, climates shifting, and we realize that we are no longer just subjects of natural resets, we're drivers of them. That doesn't make extinction a good thing. Understanding its role as a reset key is not the same as excusing it. It simply means recognizing that on this planet, renewal often follows great loss. When a dominant species disappears, the ripple effects extend through soil, water, and air. When a keystone species like a coral or a large herbivore such as the mammoth vanishes, the shape of the entire system changes. Grasslands turn to forests or vice versa. Temperatures shift slightly. New feedback loops emerge. Extinction is never just about losing a name in a textbook. It's about reorganizing relationships. It also invites a sobering thought experiment. If humans disappeared tomorrow, no disaster needed, simply gone, what would happen? At first, chaos. Power plants fail. Cities begin to decay. Domesticated animals struggle. But within decades, forests would creep into suburbs, rivers would take back their old paths, wildlife would fill spaces we've emptied. In a few thousand years, only scattered remnants of our works would still stand. In a few million, even those might be ground down or buried. New species would have evolved to take advantage of the niches we left behind. The earth would not mourn. It would reset. There's a harshness to that idea, but also a strange sense of balance. Life's resilience doesn't depend on any single species, not even ours. If we let that knowledge sink in, it doesn't have to lead straight to despair. It can also lead to humility. We are important to ourselves, and that matters. But we are not the central pillar of the planet's story. Extinction has shaped everything we see. Without it, there would be no mammals like us, no flowering plants, no modern oceans. Every tree, bird, and person is here because something else ended first. When paleontologists look at the fossil record after each major extinction, they see a familiar pattern. An initial thinness, then bursts of innovation. This burst has a name: adaptive radiation. Freed from old competitors and predators, surviving lineages quickly diversify into new forms, trying out shapes and strategies that might have been impossible before. After the dinosaurs, mammals radiated. After the Permian, reptiles and other groups did. After the Devonian, fish and early amphibians did. Extinction resets the board. Evolution makes the next move. Extinction is not the only piece of the reset puzzle, of course. It works hand in hand with floods, fires, climate shifts, and even cosmic events. Together, these forces keep Earth from standing still. They ensure that life is perpetually in motion, not towards some fixed goal, but through a changing landscape of possibilities. On that moving landscape, permanence is an illusion. Survival belongs to those who adapt. For us, living right now, the challenge is to hold all of this in mind at once. The grief of loss, the reality of change, and the knowledge that something always comes after. We can't stop every reset, but understanding how they work might help us live through them, or at least leave better conditions for whatever comes next. When people hear the phrase lost civilization, it stirs up a familiar set of images. Overgrown stone pyramids swallowed by jungle, crumbling temples half buried in sand, weathered statues staring out from mist-filled valleys no one visits anymore, divers gliding through submerged streets and toppled columns on the seafloor. But the deeper mystery of lost civilizations isn't just about dramatic ruins we can still see. It's about everything we can't see anymore. How much human history may have bloomed and vanished so completely that almost no trace remains, leaving us with only questions and a lingering sense that our story might be incomplete. Every time archaeologists uncover a forgotten city, we get a small reminder of how fragile memory is. Pompeii lay frozen under volcanic ash for nearly 2 millennia. Its people and streets sealed away, mostly absent from written memory until it was stumbled upon again. Machu Picchu sat in the clouds, known to local communities but invisible to global awareness until a modern expedition brought it to the outside world. Angkor, once the thriving capital of a vast empire in Cambodia, was slowly swallowed by forest after its decline, its stone temples hidden beneath vines and soil. Each rediscovery feels like a revelation, but it also raises a quieter, more unsettling question. If these places could be forgotten for hundreds or thousands of years, how many others are still hidden or gone beyond recovery? The farther back we go, the more the lights go out. Written records reach back maybe 5,000 years for the oldest scripts we can read with some confidence. Before that, we depend on artifacts, bones, tools, and the layout of ancient settlements. Before that, we're mostly at the mercy of whatever the Earth happened to preserve by accident. And even within that slender band of history, mysteries linger. The Indus Valley Civilization's sprawling cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro left behind intricate urban planning, sophisticated drainage, standardized weights, and evidence of long-distance trade, but their script remains undeciphered. We know they were advanced in many ways. We simply don't know exactly how they understood themselves. They flourished for centuries, then faded. Climate, changing rivers, resource pressures, social shifts. Some mix of these likely unraveled them. What we're left with is a complex culture we can see in outline but not hear in its own voice. Then there are the borderlands where story and archaeology blur. Atlantis is the most famous, first mentioned by Plato as a powerful island nation that grew arrogant, angered the gods, and sank beneath the sea. To Plato, it was likely a moral lesson and political allegory. But over time, people began taking it literally. A real advanced civilization wiped away by catastrophe. Other names have joined it. Lemuria was proposed in the 19th century as a sunken land in the Indian Ocean to explain how lemurs and other species appeared across distant coasts. Later, plate tectonics made that explanation unnecessary, but the idea of Lemuria survived in the imagination as a lost realm. Mu, said to have lain in the Pacific, became another imagined cradle of civilization, promoted in speculative writings and esoteric traditions despite having no real geological support. Whether or not any of these specific lost continents ever existed in the way storytellers describe, the concepts themselves reveal something. We feel deep down that the past might be bigger, stranger, and more layered than the official timeline suggests. Sometimes that feeling is sparked by physical puzzles. A metal object in a rock layer that seems too old. A finely crafted artifact found where it doesn't quite belong, according to our current timeline. Renaissance maps that seem to hint at coastlines shaped by long-vanished ice. Megalithic structures older or more precise than we once assumed human societies could manage. Most of these anomalies eventually settle into place when we get more data. But the fact that we keep finding them reminds us how evolving and incomplete our picture really is. Then there's the ocean, the biggest hiding place on Earth. More than 2/3 of the planet's surface is water, and most of the seabed has never been closely surveyed. At the end of the last ice age, as glaciers melted and seas rose, vast areas of coastal land were drowned. If complex societies existed along those coasts 12,000 or 15,000 years ago, most of their cities and ports would now lie under hundreds of feet of water and sediment. Divers have found intriguing hints. The stepped formations off Yonaguni in Japan, possible harbor structures and city-like remains in India's Gulf of Khambhat, odd shapes off the Bahamas. Some prove natural, some are clearly human-made, some remain uncertain. But taken together, they keep the door open to the idea that more may lie submerged, beyond easy reach. On land, time is just as relentless. Wood rots, fibers decay, mud bricks slumps and dissolves. Even stone buildings collapse under earthquakes, storms, and simple gravity. Vegetation swallows foundations. Rivers change course and scour clean old settlements. In a few thousand years, an entire city can vanish into the landscape, leaving no obvious trace from the surface. Imagine our world emptied of people. Let a few thousand years pass. Concrete and steel lose their strength. Glass shatters. Forests and wetlands creep back in. Maybe some big stone monuments and buried basements survive. But most of what defines us now, our electronics, plastics on the surface, our texts, would be gone or unrecognizable. Now move that thought backward. If a civilization rose and fell, say, 50,000 years ago or 100,000 years ago, building mostly with wood, earth, and less durable materials, how much would be left? Possibly almost nothing. This is why the idea of lost civilizations keeps returning. It's not just romance. It's a recognition that our knowledge rests on the tiny fraction of the past that happened to be preserved. We already know of cities like Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, more than 11,000 years old, built long before we thought such massive, organized construction was possible. Its carefully carved pillars and complex layout pushed back the timeline of advanced human activity by thousands of years when it was uncovered. If a single site can shift our understanding that dramatically, it's fair to ask how many more lie buried under soil, ice, or water, waiting. Time is not gentle with evidence. Every century, more disappears. Earthquakes bury sites deeper. Mudslides and floods erase layers. Forests and deserts roll over the work of hands we'll never know. Eventually, history fades into prehistory. Prehistory fades into near silence. It's in that silence that the imagination begins to wonder. When you hear claims about lost civilizations, it's easy and often reasonable to be skeptical. But when you look honestly at how many gaps exist, how much land is unexplored in depth, how much the sea has hidden, it's also hard to be absolutely certain we know the full story. We may never find an Atlantis, but we've already found plenty of lost worlds of a less dramatic kind. Entire cultures forgotten for millennia, rediscovered by chance. We already know entire knowledge systems can vanish. Libraries burn. Scripts go unread. Oral traditions die with their last speakers. If it's happened before, it can happen again, and could have happened many times further back. The mystery of lost civilizations doesn't just point backward. It reflects forward. If our own global civilization collapsed tomorrow through war, climate catastrophe, disease, or some combination, how much of us would be legible to someone digging 10,000 years from now? Maybe they'd find broken bridges here and there, crumbling foundations, corroded metal in strange shapes. Maybe they'd find a layer of plastic fragments and sediments, or odd chemical signatures from pesticides and fuel. Maybe radioactive isotopes marking our brief atomic age. From these fragments, they'd try to reconstruct a story. They'd imagine an age of machines, in which people harnessed invisible forces, lit up nights, and reached into space. They might exaggerate some aspects, misunderstand others, and turn parts of it into legend. Or maybe they'd find almost nothing and have no idea we were ever here. In that sense, when we talk about lost civilizations, we're also talking about ourselves. We're looking at our own reflection in the glass of time, seeing how fragile we are, how easy it would be for almost everything we know to vanish. We like to picture ourselves as the peak history's destination, but maybe we're just one more expression in a long, uneven series of experiments. Maybe we're not the first to build complex structures, write intricate myths, or look up at the stars and wonder if there was something before. And when we speak of civilizations swallowed by jungle or sea, perhaps we're really confronting a deeper truth. Earth does not promise permanence to anyone. That recognition naturally leads to the stories that have become shorthand for this idea, names that have slipped from speculative philosophy into folklore. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. These names are more than simple tales. They've become symbols for the suspicion that our known history might be only part of a larger, layered past, that the reset may have already happened, more than once, and that entire worlds may have vanished so thoroughly they now exist primarily as dreams. Atlantis, mentioned by Plato over 2,000 years ago, began as an allegory, a way to talk about arrogance, justice, and the fate of powerful societies that lose their balance. He described a wealthy island civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar, that fell into moral decay and was eventually sunk by the gods in a single day and night of catastrophe. Over the centuries, readers grew less interested in the lesson and more interested in the place. Maybe it was real. Maybe it wasn't just metaphor. Maybe there really was an advanced culture out there, swallowed by the sea. Searches for Atlantis have placed it almost everywhere. In the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, the Caribbean, even under Antarctic ice. None have offered hard proof. And yet, the legend persists. People want Atlantis to be true, not only because it would rewrite history, but because it would confirm that we're not the only ones who have stood where we stand. Lemuria's story started not in philosophy, but in early science. 19th century naturalists, puzzled by the distribution of lemurs and other species across Madagascar, India, and Southeast Asia, proposed that there had once been a land bridge or even a vanished continent across the Indian Ocean. They called it Lemuria. Later, as plate tectonics reshaped our understanding of continents and oceans, such a landmass became unnecessary and scientifically untenable. But the idea didn't die. It migrated from geology into myth and spiritual literature. Lemuria became a peaceful, enlightened homeland in some esoteric traditions, a lost cradle of humanity, a place of great wisdom wiped out by disaster. Though no longer needed in scientific models, it flourished in imagination. Mu followed a similar path, popularized by a 19th and 20th century wave of speculative books. It was said to be a vast Pacific continent that sank beneath the ocean. Like Lemuria, it doesn't fit with what we've learned about ocean crust and plate tectonics. But also like Lemuria, it endured in stories, shaping fiction, belief systems, and our modern sense of mystery. What these dreamlands share is not geological reality, but symbolic power. They stand in for all the places we know have vanished. The drowned coasts of Doggerland, the flooded plains of Sunderland, the lost land bridge of Beringia, and countless smaller shorelines and islands around the world. None of those were single mighty continents full of crystal cities, but to the people who lived there, they were entire worlds. Had those people told stories about their drowned homes, we can imagine how they might sound after thousands of years. Tales of shining lands swallowed by the sea, of great cities now under waves, in other words, Atlantis. That's part of why these myths are so sticky. We know that rising seas really have erased human homelands. We know that quakes and eruptions really have torn apart communities. We know that whole cultural landscapes have vanished. So the idea of lost lands is not fantasy. It's just been given exaggerated, romantic names. Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu endure not because they're accurate maps, but because they encode our intuition that we don't have all the pages of the book. Even when searches for these legendary places fail, they turn up real wonders: submerged harbor structures, forgotten coastal towns, unknown shipwrecks, and hints of human presence in places long overlooked. In trying to find one dreamland, we often discover whole chapters we didn't know we were missing. In that sense, these myths have done a kind of work for us. They've kept our curiosity alive. They've pushed explorers, divers, and scientists to look in places we might have ignored. They also serve as mirrors. We fear collapse, so we tell stories of advanced civilizations punished by their own excesses. We long for a sense of origin, so we imagine lost homelands that might explain who we are. We sense our own fragility, so we invent cautionary tales dressed up as history. These dreamlands let us rehearse the idea of reset, that greatness can vanish, that memory can drown, that the earth can cover its tracks with startling efficiency. Whether or not Atlantis ever existed as a real city, the lesson it carries is strangely consistent with what science shows us. The sea does erase, land does sink, civilizations do fall. Maybe the truth is that there were many Atlantises, real coastal cultures, wiped out by real waters, later remembered in exaggerated form. Maybe Lemuria is every lost shore in the Indian Ocean, every submerged valley. Maybe Mu is a stand-in for all the human stories that lie beneath the Pacific waves, and for all the resets we'll never fully reconstruct. To dwell on these places is not to abandon critical thinking. It's to acknowledge the tension between what we can prove and what we can reasonably suspect, that the world has changed more than our written record preserves, that resets have left bigger blanks than we like to admit. And if all of this is true for Earth, with its floods, quakes, and shifting crust, we might reasonably suspect that similar rhythms of rise and fall, of memory and forgetting, play out far beyond our planet as well. Because in the end, Earth is just one world among billions. If resets happen here, they likely happen elsewhere. And if civilizations can vanish so thoroughly that they become only a story, perhaps that's not a uniquely human fate, but part of a pattern written into the cosmos itself. If you zoom far enough out in time, not decades, not centuries, not even single millennia, but tens of thousands of years at a glance, a different pattern begins to emerge on Earth. It's not a pattern of dynasties, wars, or inventions. It's a pattern of climate. A long, slow rhythm driven by ice and fire. These twin forces are like the planet's metronome. They shape every ecosystem, every migration, every rise and fall of life. They are resets measured in glaciers and lava rather than in calendars and clocks. Ice is the softer voiced of the two, but no less powerful. Over the past 2.5 million years or so, Earth has slid in and out of ice ages again and again. Massive ice sheets, miles thick in places, crept down from the poles, grinding rock beneath their weight. They carved U-shaped valleys, sculpted fjords, and bulldozed the land into new contours. Then, as orbital cycles shifted the distribution of sunlight on the planet, the ice pulled back. Glaciers melted, oceans swelled, river systems reorganized, and new fertile plains appeared in their wake. These swings are tied to subtle changes in Earth's orbit and tilt-Milankovitch cycles that change how sunlight is spread across latitudes and seasons. They don't flip the climate overnight. They operate over tens of thousands of years. But for the humans and animals living through them, they were anything but abstract. If you stood in Europe 20,000 years ago, you'd see walls of ice on the horizon. If you lived in North America, you might be pushed southward as advancing ice changed the landscape right in front of you. Long winters, scarce food, endless winds off the ice. This wasn't a line in a textbook, it was life. Then comes fire ice's volatile companion. Fire arrives in eruptions, in lava flows, in geysers of ash and gas from deep within the planet. Sometimes in the candle flame scale of a campfire, sometimes in the civilization-ending scale of a supervolcano. Volcanoes like Yellowstone in North America or Toba in Indonesia sit atop vast reservoirs of molten rock. When they erupt in their most extreme mode, they can eject so much ash and sulfur into the atmosphere that sunlight is dimmed globally. Temperatures drop, harvests fail, species die. The climate may take years to recover, yet the scars last much longer. Even smaller eruptions can reset regional ecosystems, bury towns, dam rivers, create new lakes, and pave over forests with hardened lava that will take centuries to weather into soil. Then there's the fire that doesn't come from within Earth at all, but from space. Asteroids and comets carry kinetic energy that, when suddenly converted on impact, becomes heat so intense it can ignite forests thousands of miles away. The radiation flash, shock waves, and global wildfires that follow can reset not just ecosystems, but entire eras. Together, ice and fire create a dynamic duo of disruption. Ice advances slowly, rearranging continents almost politely. Fire strikes fast and then lingers through ash and altered atmospheres. Between them, life is constantly pressured to adapt, retreat, or perish. If you trace the fossil record across these cycles, you can see life answering those pressures. Species evolve thicker coats, different metabolisms, new migration habits. Plants shift ranges. Some lineages shrink or vanish. Others expand into vacated niches. The story of life isn't a simple climb upward. It's more like a long hike through rugged terrain, up, down, sideways, with surprise storms and sudden clearings. Even within human history, these long cycles have left clear fingerprints. The last glacial maximum forced human groups into refuges where climate was still tolerable. As ice retreated, new lands opened up. Northern Europe, Northern Asia, the Americas. Humans followed game, filled new territories, and developed distinct cultures shaped by those regions. The Green Sahara, once a mosaic of lakes, rivers, and grasslands, supported people, animals, and vegetation. Then, as orbital patterns shifted and monsoon rains weakened, that region dried out. Communities moved or reinvented themselves, and memories of a fertile desert persisted only in rock art and story. Fire has marked us as well. The eruption of Thera, Santorini, in the Bronze Age devastated the Minoan civilization and may have triggered tsunamis and crop failures across the eastern Mediterranean. Some researchers see echoes of that eruption in later flood and disaster stories around the region. The eruption of Tambora in 1815 dimmed the sun enough to create the year without a summer. Crops failed from Europe to North America. Famine, disease, and migration followed. A single volcano nudged human affairs on multiple continents. These are just recent local examples of a much older pattern. Earth's climate and geology constantly rewriting the rules of survival. The cycles of ice and fire also reveal how fortunate our current moment is. The entire span of recorded human civilization, from ancient Sumer to now, has unfolded during a relatively stable, warm period between major ice ages. This climatic sweet spot made agriculture reliable enough for permanent settlements, which allowed cities to form, which made specialized roles, writing, and technologies possible. But this stability is an exception, not the rule. Look back in time, and you see wild swings as normal. Extended cold, extended warmth, breakdowns, and rebalancing. The fact that our entire known history sits inside this quiet window can make us forget how restless the planet really is. In this big picture, ice and fire aren't enemies. They're partners in a long dance. Ice scrubs and resets. Fire burns and rebuilds. The valleys carved by glaciers become fertile farms. The ash from eruptions enriches soils. The scars of old disasters often turn into hotspots of new abundance. This doesn't make the suffering they cause less real. For those living through a reset, it's catastrophe. But for the Earth as a whole, it's the mechanism by which energy and life keep moving. Recognizing this invites a difficult but important shift in thinking. We usually see disaster as interruption. The larger truth is that disaster is part of the process, a violent phase in an ongoing cycle. Today we've added something new to that cycle: ourselves. We harness fire as fuel. We dig fossil carbon and release it to the air, warming the planet far faster than natural cycles would. We dam rivers, clear forests, drain wetlands, and acidify the oceans. We've become, in effect, another form of geological force. Small compared to tectonic plates or giant impacts, but huge compared to what other species can do. We're now both subject to resets and potential initiators of them. Which brings us to another side of this story: healing. Because for all the damage ice, fire, impacts, and extinctions have done, the Earth has responded in a remarkable way. After each blow, it has slowly, clumsily, patiently healed. Asteroids sterilize huge areas. New ecosystems eventually grow over the craters. Volcanoes choke skies and poison seas. In time, the atmosphere clears, the oceans rebalance, and marine life returns. Ice smothers continents. When it withdraws, plants and animals recolonize the newly exposed land. Healing doesn't mean everything goes back to exactly how it was. It means the system finds a new equilibrium. Take the aftermath of the dinosaur-killing asteroid. For a while, the Earth must have felt broken. Fires scorched forests, soot and dust blocked sunlight. Temperatures plunged, plants died back, creatures starved. Yet in burrows, in sheltered corners, in overlooked pockets of the world, some small animals survived. When the skies brightened again and plants returned, those survivors spread into an emptier, quieter Earth. Within a few million years, a blink, geologically speaking, life had once again diversified into an astonishing range of forms. The details were different this time. More mammals, different birds, new plants. But the tapestry was rich again. Similar patterns show up at other crisis points. After the Permian extinction, the recovery was slow and drawn out. But eventually ecosystems flourished with new complexity. After oceanic dead zones, currents shift and oxygen returns, allowing marine life to recover. Earth has built-in processes that help it heal. Rock weathering that gradually pulls carbon dioxide from the air. Plants that trap and store carbon. Chemical feedback loops in the oceans. An atmosphere that, over long spans, push the climate back toward balance. They operate so slowly that from a human vantage, they seem almost absent. But from the planet's vantage, they're steady and dependable. Even in places where human activity has created deep scars, signs of healing appear once we move aside. After the nuclear disaster at Chernobyl, birds, wolves, and other wildlife returned in surprising numbers. The ecosystem there is certainly altered and irradiated, but in the absence of constant human pressure, life found ways to fill the space. At Bikini Atoll, where explosive nuclear tests once vaporized sections of reef and island, corals have regrown in places, fish have come back, and a strange, altered kind of beauty has reappeared. Healing isn't about restoring an old photograph. It's about growth after damage. Different, imperfect, but alive. It's crucial, though, to be honest. Earth's ability to heal does not guarantee our place in the healed world. The planet doesn't promise survival to any particular species. It doesn't pause its processes to preserve our cities or cultures. From Earth's perspective, Healing is about the continuation of life in some form, not about keeping everything the same. That realization can be unsettling. It means we are not indispensable. If we push our environment too far, if we trigger rapid warming, mass extinctions, or runaway pollution, the planet will eventually recover. But we may not be part of that recovery. At the same time, there's comfort in recognizing that the story is bigger than any single reset. It means that even after the worst disasters, some thread has always continued. Life has always managed to find a foothold and grow again. We live because healing has already happened countless times, which leads to an intimate question. How much of us actually lasts? How durable are our footprints in the face of all this rearranging, resetting, and healing? We tend to assume that our mark on the planet is deep and permanent. Skyscrapers feel solid. Highways seem endless. Satellites, visible as tiny moving stars at night, look like a permanent addition to the sky. But if you translate those impressions into geologic time, almost all of it becomes fragile. Buildings crumble quickly without maintenance. Moisture infiltrates concrete, freezes and fractures it. Steel rusts, glass shatters. Plants push roots into cracks. In a few hundred years without upkeep, most skyscrapers would be unrecognizable piles of rubble. In a few thousand, the rubble might be deeply covered by soil and vegetation. Roads break apart as water gets into them, as heat and cold expand and contract them, as roots tear through. Without repairs, many highways would be hard to detect after several centuries. A careful eye might find faint linear patterns in the soil ghosts of transportation networks, but nothing like the asphalt ribbons we know. Our monuments may fare better, but not forever. The pyramids could stand for many thousands more years. The carvings of Mount Rushmore might endure in some form for hundreds of thousands, though wind and rain will gradually blur the faces. Certain megaliths, carved from extremely hard stone, might outlast entire mountain ranges around them. Yet even stone yields eventually. Water, temperature, and gravity never stop their work. If there's any material legacy of ours that might truly leave a long-lasting record, it's likely to be what we've treated as disposable: plastics, strange alloys, industrial chemicals, and radioactive waste. Microplastics could remain trapped in sediments for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years. Future geologists might see a thin, global layer of plastic fragments in rocks of our era. Radioactive isotopes produced in nuclear tests and reactors could act as precise timestamps for our moment, detectable long after buildings and borders are forgotten. From that vantage, our most enduring footprint may not be our art or architecture, but a weird chemical signature in the rocks. Even so, tectonic processes and erosion will eventually recycle or bury that record too. Oceans open and close. Crust is subducted into the mantle. Mountains rise and fall. Over tens of millions of years, most evidence of us will be scattered beyond recognition, which suggests something both humbling and oddly liberating. In the deep future, Earth may carry no clear memory of us at all. We may become to that future what hypothetical past civilizations are to us now: a possibility, a mystery, a rumor written in odd anomalies in the rocks. So what then truly matters? If our buildings, devices, and even our languages are all transient, then maybe the core question isn't, what do we leave that lasts, but how do we live while we're here? This is where the idea of reset circles back from geology and mythology into our everyday choices. The evidence tells us that history, in the broadest sense, repeats, not in exact details, but in patterns. Climate warms and cools. Ecosystems expand and contract. Civilizations rise and fall. Each time, there are warning signs, stressed environments, overextended systems, sudden shocks. We can see some of those signs now: accelerating species loss, rapid climate change, increasingly interconnected and therefore fragile global systems. We can also see smaller human cycles empires stretching too far, economies overreaching, social fabrics fraying and knitting back together. The lesson isn't that doom is guaranteed. The lesson is that cycles are real and that ignoring them makes us vulnerable when the next reset comes, whatever form it takes. If resets are inevitable, then our task isn't to pretend they'll never arrive. It's to build resilience, personally, culturally, ecologically, so that when the clock ticks, some thread carries through. In nature, resilience comes from diversity, adaptability, cooperation, redundancy, and humility before bigger forces. Systems that embody those qualities bend instead of shattering. We can learn from that. We can design societies that don't depend on a single crop, a single energy source, or a single economic model. We can protect pockets of wildness as reservoirs of genetic and ecological resilience. We can preserve stories and knowledge in many forms and places, not just in fragile digital vaults. We can remember that local strength matters as much as, or more than, centralized power. That many small, flexible communities can absorb shocks better than one fragile global structure. We can accept that change is not a failure, but a constant. And we can prepare not just technically, but emotionally, to face it. Because in the end, resets are as much about meaning as they are about matter. If everything is temporary, then each moment glows a little brighter. Each relationship, each act of kindness, each quiet evening becomes something you can't ever truly replace. The very fact that we and anyone are alive now, at this point in the planet's long, tumultuous story, is astonishing. Resets remind us that we are not guaranteed endless tomorrows. They also remind us that even when tomorrows change shape, something goes on. Stars explode and new stars form from their remains. Civilizations collapse and others rise on the same ground. Planets endure fire and ice and still one day bear forests and oceans again. Our place in that ongoing rhythm is brief, but real. So when you lie there listening, maybe half awake, maybe already drifting, wondering whether Earth has been reset before, whether other worlds like ours have come and gone, whether anything truly lasts, you can hold two thoughts at once. One, everything changes. Worlds end. Memories fade. Our marks on the planet are more fragile than they seem. Two, every reset is also a beginning. Life endures. Stories adapt. New dawns follow dark nights. We are here now, in this thin slice of time, between what has already been erased and what is yet to arrive. We are here to witness, to feel, to learn, to care for what we can, and to pass forward whatever fragments of wisdom we manage to gather. That is enough. So as you close your eyes, you can imagine the deep history under you, forgotten continents, vanished forests, creatures whose names no one will ever know. You can imagine the possible futures ahead, new climates, new forms of life, maybe even new civilizations. You don't have to solve it all tonight. You can simply rest inside the awareness that you are part of a vast, ongoing story, a story of resets and renewals, of endings and beginnings woven so tightly together that they are, in the end, the same thing. And as sleep slowly rises to meet you, you might let one last thought drift through. Whatever has been reset before, whatever will be reset again, right now, in this fragile, irreplaceable moment, you are here, and that all by itself is a kind of miracle.